Welcome to the Human Nature Channel. I'm your host, Alex Tamsul, and what am I doing here? Well, no farm garage footage this week. Last week, I didn't sleep over at my dad's place like I normally do from Tuesdays to Wednesdays. I only went up for a Christmas lunch on Wednesday with my dad, my brother, and his lady friend. But this Tuesday, I'll be in the farm garage for New Year's Eve, and I'll have something for you after that. What I'm going to do now is give you part 2 of the Alex and Eric show. I'm going to give Eric the last word here, since what he has to say neatly sums up where the Las Vegas shooting truth community finds itself now. Eric, I saw this comment only once after seeing your earlier comment. All is good. The Alex and Eric show, I look forward to that. With regards to the search for a motive, I have no problem with people trying to figure out what the motive could have been, but I am frustrated with the fact that a lot of important evidence, which could be very helpful in determining the motive, has not been released. I already mentioned Paddock's playing stats, but there is a lot more. The best evidence should be in the transcripts or notes of the interviews with the people who knew him best, Mary Lou Danley and Eric Paddock. Other evidence that could help us better understand who he was are his financial records, transactions, balances, etc. No social media records, emails, personal photos, or phone records have been released either. Nor do we know much about his whereabouts in the months before the shooting. There were no transcripts of interviews with other people who could have known him better, such as friends, neighbors, or business contacts. In addition to that, important evidence about the crime scene is missing too. Crime scene photos, GSR analysis, thermostat data, to name a few. Coupled with the lack of clear motive and even intent, this seriously hampers people on the outside like ourselves to understand what happened, and it leads to speculation that it wasn't exactly as we were told. The cui bono question is interesting, but is only really relevant if we allow ourselves to consider the possibility that Paddock didn't act alone or was a patsy. If he acted alone, as they say, then the cui must be Stephen Paddock himself. And then, the way in which he benefited should tell us what drove him to do this, the word motive in parentheses. If he acted alone, then the FBI is probably correct in saying that he wanted to die by suicide, because this was not going to end in any other way than his death. They also believe that he wanted to attain a certain degree of infamy via a mass casualty attack. That is a little more speculative, as yes, he would certainly become infamous, but in the worst possible way. Who would want that? If he planned and did this all by himself, I'd go for the simplest of explanations. He did it because he could. It would have given him a thrill, and when he decided it was time for his suicide and nothing mattered anymore, he may have sought out an opportunity that would give him one last incredible thrill. Did he also want to send a message to society in the style of, look, America, in this country, I can just buy as many guns as I want, bring them into a hotel room right next to a concert venue, and shoot 1,000 rounds into the crowd? Perhaps he wanted to send such a message, or perhaps not, and he did it for personal gratification only. Or he didn't do it at all, wink. Only more evidence can bring us closer to a proper understanding. Thank you, Eric. Oh, by the way, I've got 3 bots following me on Twitter, constantly feeding me Las Vegas shooting articles, most of which I've already read. How about that? Recently, I changed my handle on Twitter. I do that from time to time just to stay fresh, and now I am calling myself the Whiskey Rebellion Part 2. Don't worry, I'm still the Greaser Warhol, that hasn't changed. But in a past video somewhere, I talked briefly about the Whiskey Rebellion of 1790 to 1794. Not only did it take place in post-Revolutionary War America, but it was centered here in Pittsburgh and is a fascinating and pivotal story in the creation of our nation. I should do an entire video on that subject one of these days. It really is the hard stuff. After the Whiskey Rebellion, Alexander Hamilton demanded people of this region to give loyalty oaths to the government. One veteran of the Revolutionary War said, "I bled for this country. I'm not giving you any oath." I think they jailed him. Fucking Hamilton. Could somebody please give me 2 5s for a 10 so I don't have to look at this asshole? The big takeaway from the history of the Whiskey Rebellion is how Alexander Hamilton was an absolute scumbag for placing an excise tax on whiskey production nationwide, putting small distillers out of business to benefit larger distillers, George Washington being one of them. Alexander Hamilton couldn't wait to betray the American Revolution, which was at its heart about throwing off the yoke of British aristocracy. But Hamilton was as aristocratic as they came. He brought the aristocracy in through the back door. And by the way, Epstein didn't kill himself. I'm picking up the long dormant banner of the Whiskey Rebellion, even if it's only a one-man rebellion, and I'm giving it new life from its ancestral home. So who am I rebelling against? Bullies. Specifically bullies and cowards here in the Las Vegas shooting truth community. You know who they are, they know who they are. I have a long story about recently confronting a bully, which I will tell you in the second part of this video, this playing a large role in focusing my thoughts on the subject. But we will start off talking about one of the most egregious and cowardly bullies nominally connected to the Las Vegas shooting investigation, and that's our old friend Jason Goodman over at Crowdsource the Landfill. I discovered that Goodman, who I follow on Twitter, blocked me. Not only can I not answer his tweets or send him any, I'm not even permitted to see his tweets. I kind of stumbled on this by accident and I wasn't surprised. It's been something like 6 months since I've seen any of Goodman's tweets. But the other day I just happened to check and lo and behold, I'm blocked. Not that I'm missing anything since Crowdsource the Truth is such a garbagey YouTube channel anyway. At Crowdsource the Truth, there are never any links in the notes section to sourced articles or other videos supporting any opinions expressed, as far as I've seen. There is usually just a link to something about that video's guest. Compare what Goodman does to somebody like a James Corbett over at the Corbett Report, who does source everything he has to say in great detail. If you compare the amount of Corbett's links to Goodman's, you'll see what I'm talking about. But notice, in blocking me, how Jason Goodman thinks he's above any type of criticism, which my tweets to him usually were. I never insulted the man personally in a tweet, but he doesn't have the brains or the balls to confront me directly. He's a gutless wonder, which most bullies usually are, and he takes the easy way out. Are you afraid of me, Jason? Are you afraid I'm going to mess things up for your stupid little money machine? That I'm going to cut the legs out from under your paranoia propaganda? I still want to hear what you have to say about Plantation, Squirrel Hill's leapfrog nature, you piece of shit. Just between you, me, and the lamppost, I think Plantation, Squirrel Hill scares the living hell out of Jason Goodman, because then he has to start asking himself some tough questions about Laura Loomer, which he doesn't want to do. Plus, I know I'm smarter than him. He won't confront me because I'll expose him as a total two-faced phony. If I had his connections, I could do what he does, which is just be a conspiracy theory fanboy doing interviews. But he can't do what I do, which is create actual content. Hide behind your block, Jason. One of these days, I'm going to corner you and ask your opinion on Plantation, Squirrel Hill, just to watch you weasel your way out of answering. Oh well, enough about that moron. What I'd like to ask my subscribers and viewers who are on Twitter to do is, please, share my videos on your Twitter feed. It's not simply because I want to grow my channel, which I do, but this would be a way to bring new people into the Las Vegas shooting video investigation community. This is a way to get the word out and ask people to join our cause, because we sure could use an infusion of talent. Let me ask you this. Is the LVS Truth community growing or is it shrinking? I think it's shrinking, and this would be a way to counteract that. I try to make entertaining videos, but not just for the sake of entertainment. I strive to raise awareness of the Route 91 Harvest Festival massacre and how problematic the official investigations remain. Call me a narrative hugger or any other stupid shit you can think of, because it doesn't matter what I say. Only that I've created a backlog of LVS videos that were meant to grab people's attention and pull them in and get them to consider what is wrong with the FIT report and the FBI's 3 sheets of toilet paper. What you can do on Twitter is become a Twitter follower of Crowdsource the Truth and post my YouTube videos there. Who knows? Jason Goodman might even block you too. But at least he'll know I'm not letting him off the hook anytime soon. Just what a bully like him deserves. About 3 weeks ago on a Saturday, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Squirrel Hill, and I saw an episode of bullying and what could also be considered elder abuse. Let me set the scene for you. In this coffee shop, they have square tables, right? And I'm sitting next to somebody I talk to a lot. I'll call him Mr. X. And Mr. X had his table against the wall, and I was to the right of him. Now, in front of us, there's a guy who also comes to the coffee shop. His name is, well, we're going to call him Earl. It's not his real name, but it's close enough. Earl has a table pushed up against the wall, and he has a second table pushed up to it. So he's basically commandeered 2 tables. He's got his laptop there, he's got his food, and there is an empty table off to the right. So I'm chit-chatting with Mr. X, and the next thing I know, something has caught Mr. X's attention, and I look, and I see that Frank has sat down on the table on the right. And there is Earl saying, "Frank, could you please move? Frank, could you please move? Frank, could you please move?" Now let me tell you something about Frank. Okay, he's an older guy. I think he's in his 70s by now. He's kind of timid. I really don't know what the story is with Frank. And in the interest of full disclosure, I don't even particularly like Frank. Frank makes friends with people, and then he borrows money off them, and after he's got the bill, runs to the nearest convenience store and buys lottery tickets. So I'm like, but in a way that's kind of beside the point. Frank also wears a pair of pants that look like they've never seen the inside of a washing machine. So that becomes part of the mix. So anyway, I turn and I'm looking, and there's Earl saying, "Frank, could you please move? Frank, could you please move?" Frank stands up. He doesn't say okay to this request. He doesn't say yes. He gets up and he moves so the badgering would stop. Now at this point, I'm royally pissed off. And primarily, I'm angry at myself for not saying something at that moment like, "Frank, stay where you are. Don't listen to him. This guy doesn't have the right to assign seating." But I didn't. So anyway, 10:30 that night, my buddy, the Human Encyclopedia, comes by to watch movies. And I happen to have a copy of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Quentin Tarantino movie. And I says to him, "Well, I know you've seen this. You want to see it again?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll watch it again." So we're watching the movie, and a little bit of a digression here. I really liked Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I thought it was great. I thought Pitt and DiCaprio were just amazing in this movie. Probably the best movie about making movies this side of Federico Fellini's 8.5. How's that for being a cineasta, huh? But anyway, if you've seen the movie, you know that Cliff is a real hombre. you don't mess with Cliff. And I'm sitting there watching the movie and I'm like, you know, if Cliff had been sitting where I was sitting in that coffee shop, he wouldn't have let Earl bully Frank that way. And I'm just like, oh, great, oh, man. And that wasn't the only thing that was making me angry, too. Earl wouldn't have tried that on any of the other guys in that coffee shop. We would have told him to get stuffed. But he thinks he can do this to Frank. And I found out later that Earl claims that, you know, he's got a sensitive nose and Frank smells. And I was sitting closer to Frank than Earl was, so that's just total bullshit. And so I'm watching this movie, and I was having a tough time paying attention. My mind would start drifting off to what I'd seen in the coffee shop. And fortunately, it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, so it keeps pulling me back in. But the interesting thing about this movie is there's a lot of rage in this movie. Just below the surface, there's Tarantino's rage at what the Manson family did to pregnant Sharon Tate. There's also a lot of rage in Rick. And so it set up this feedback loop where, you know, it's kind of an angry movie, and I'm kind of angry, and I'm just getting angry and angry and angry. Oh, God. Okay. At that point, or at some point, like as I was watching the movie, I said, you know what? I'm going to get out of that coffee shop on Sunday, and if I see Earl, I'm going to tell him that I didn't like the way he treated Frank. Okay. So the next day, this is Sunday, I go down to the coffee shop, and there's nobody in it that I recognize. But behind the counter is this guy named Cordello. And I like Cordello a whole lot. He's a really nice guy. He's a fine Texas gentleman who has been transplanted to Pittsburgh. And so I go up to him and say, hey, Cordello, you got the phone number of the manager to this coffee shop. And he's like, let me get on the phone and call some of the other shops and see if he's around. So he's on the phone for a little bit, and he comes back and he says, well, the manager doesn't leave his phone number with anybody because Sunday's his day off, and he doesn't want to be bothered. And I'm like, oh, great. And then Cordello says, but one of the owners of the coffee shop is sitting up front. Why don't you go talk to her? I'm like, oh, okay. So I go up to her, and I tell her what I saw. You know, basically, Earl was browbeating Frank, and since Frank is timid, he's just going to slink off. And I said, could you send the message to the manager, let him know I saw this happening. So anyway, I go sit down, and I'm there for a little bit, and Earl walks in. And I'm like, okay. And I say, hey, Earl. He's like, hey, what's up? And I stand up, and he's starting to sit down at the table. I says, Earl, I didn't like the way you were bullying Frank yesterday. And he's like, well, I wasn't bullying Frank. I was just asking him to move. And I says, no, you were badgering him, and I'm taking it to the manager of the coffee shop. And Earl was like, well, go ahead, whatever. Okay. So you got to understand something about Earl. He sits there, then he gets up and he leaves, and he goes to other stores, buys food, and brings it back here. So while he was away, Cordello says to me, he's like, hey, Alex, I like the way you confronted Earl about this. Because you got to understand, nobody likes Earl in this shop. He acts like he owns the place. He's a real jerk. But having Cordello see that and compliment me on it and say, you know, he liked what he saw, suddenly I'm no longer so angry with myself. And this is the part of the story where I experienced a real upside. You know, I took some risks because you don't know how this Earl guy is going to react. But I got acknowledged and I felt good. Now, there's a second part of this story that I'm going to tell you next week when I finally did have a chance to talk to the manager of this coffee shop. But you may be asking yourself, well, what's this got to do with the Las Vegas shooting truth community? And I would say everything, okay? Because there is bullying that goes on in the Las Vegas shooting truth community, and the one person who has been bullied the most, who happened to be a victim of the Las Vegas shooting, was Melissa Ramirez. I have never seen anything like this, okay? It's been claimed that she was a rag doll. It's been claimed that she was a mannequin moved in a wheelbarrow. And there was a video recently, I'm not going to say who put it out, Basically, it was footage that belonged to Mike Turber, and Mike Turber retained it. And there's Melissa Ramirez on the ground, and there's people around her, and there's all this weird stuff going around with like red arrows flashing and stuff. Never acknowledges Melissa Ramirez's existence, as if she was nothing to the person that did this video. That's bullying, okay? That makes me angry. Forget the fact that Mike didn't even get, an attribution for this video. The fact that you would focus in on this, give us a close-up, and pretend like she wasn't even a person, that really made me angry too. I got a tough time with anger. Sometimes I gotta like sit back and breathe and relax and everything. So anyway, that's the story. There'll be more. I want to wish all my subscribers and viewers a Happy New Year. And have a good one.